Sky News reporter Annelise Nielsen. She worked with Cheng Lei in Beijing for the Chinese state media some years ago. I spoke to her a short time ago from the United States, which is covering the US election. Annelise Nielsen, thank you so much for joining me. You worked at CGTN. What is it exactly?
Well, look, Andrew, it's the state-run broadcaster for Chinese news, but there are huge differences in between different parts of the business. It's an enormous operation, and there are plenty of parts that are focused to international news. I worked in a part that was more focused on feature news. When you get an inside look in the Chinese government, though, you realise they don't do a heck of a lot, really. It was pretty extraordinary getting that insight into how the Chinese government works. The workload was really quite forgiving. But the channel that Cheng Lei worked for is the business channel, which has always been seen as very apolitical. It's more pivoted to an external audience, and you don't really see the tough propaganda in China if you're not looking towards a Chinese audience. And so there are those differences, and depending on what language channel you're working on, it's all very different. But I was also there over 5 years ago now, and that was also a very different time.
I think that's absolutely correct. Cheng Lei, what sort of person is that?
Well, look, I don't want to overstate our relationship. I only met her a handful of times, but she was known around the place as just the really nice Australian. Plenty of people said, oh, you've got to meet her, she's just lovely. And when I did, she was incredibly warm, very inviting, and it's a really tough place to try and get your head around. I didn't fare too well. She really figured out how to make the role work so well for her because she loved China. She loves China still, I'm sure, but she does love her job, and she was very good at it. And one analogy that I was told in China by a journalist there that's always stuck with me is when you're working in China, it's like surviving being stuck in a riptide. If you swim against it, you'll drown. If you swim with it and just give in, you'll drown. If you learn how to work with the current and slowly swim with it, that's how you survive. And she is one that really did that so well. So I know I'm horrified at what's happened. So many of us who used to work with her and have much closer relationships are equally really quite distraught at this news and really hope that it does come to some kind of resolution soon.
Can I just tease you out a little bit there? Obviously, working for a state broadcaster that's run and so tightly by a dictatorship is a tricky business. What are the difficulties exactly for a journalist in Cheng Lei's position?
Cheng Lei was a lot more senior than me, and so I'm not exactly sure what her life was like. One of the things that I had a real misconception about going in was I assumed there'd be a real rule book when you go in that said you can't do this, you can do this, you can't say this, you can say this. It's a lot more of people being very ambitious in the business, and especially if you are from China, it's a lot more about climbing the ladder, and you do that by impressing your seniors. And so it's a lot more of an incentive-driven place, and it's also a place that people tend to have their jobs for life. So for the foreigners coming in, it's quite different, and she really was considered one of those few that could manage both quite well, and she does and did, and it's really... It depends on what part of the business you're talking about. Again, in the business sphere for CGTN, it was really different from the news part. So it's a much longer conversation that we can probably fit into this very short segment, Andrew, but there were numerous challenges and plenty of chances to offend people, which I know I did. Many turns my career didn't go too well there. I was there for just under a year, but some people do manage it much better.
And you said that in the 5 years since, the atmosphere in China seems to have changed a lot. How would you characterise that?
There's obviously been a really tough crackdown. When I was there, it was very much still in that idea that we were partnering with China, that the more that foreigners partnered with China, the better the living conditions became for Chinese people. And so we were all part of what could be just an improvement for everyone's life, and it was about learning and expanding. Even when I was there, there were some really subtle changes in the Chinese government that signalled to a lot of us that we needed to get out. It was things like the junior Communist Party no longer feeding up leadership positions to senior Communist Party officials. That was a real signal that Xi Jinping was clamping down from on top. And just those subtle things. I left right after the South China Sea decision, and just the absolute propaganda machine that pulled in behind that. And the just ferocity they did with that, it really signalled that this was a much harder line China. They were becoming much more nationalistic, and it wasn't going to be that global partnership that they'd been pushing for so many years, saying that it had helped bring so many people out of poverty. It was really starting to wear thin.
Well, it's the fear now, isn't it, that she's crossed some sort of political trip line now, and there's so many of them. You see that in the crackdown on journalists in Hong Kong in particular right now. It's a frightening time. Annelise Nielsen, thank you so much for your insights.
Thank you.